Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. Every once in a while, I think about the trade that the Browns made at the draft last year. And there are so many different angles to look at that trade from, and particularly the moves that the Browns made with the Jacksonville Jaguars last year. And it's interesting to look back at those moves because it really informs a lot about everything that went on with that first move. So let's go back to it, right? We all know the story. Browns have the number 2 pick in the draft. Travis Hunter is the obvious number 2 selection. He is a hybrid corner/wide receiver, the first of his kind. Heisman Trophy winner, legit baller. And it looks like the Browns are going to take him. I was convinced on draft day that the Browns were going to select him. And the Browns trade that pick to move 3 spots to number 5. And then they get, in return, a first-round pick for this year's draft and then a second-round pick for last year's draft that ended up being Quincy Junkins. So the Browns got a lot just to move up 3 spots, which would indicate that if you're the Jacksonville Jaguars, you have not just the highest of hopes for Travis Hunter, but you think that Travis Hunter can be a transformational player, right? Like, you got to think about that. The amount of assets that you gave up to get Travis Hunter, you're expecting a transformational result. And obviously, if you have transformational hopes for a player, you clearly would have a plan in place for that player and for what that's going to look like when that player is on your team. And what I found fascinating about that trade is the more and more you pay attention to the Jaguars side of it, the more and more you question if they actually had a plan for Travis Hunter. Again, like, Travis Hunter's not like some late first-round pick. He's not a second-round pick. You can legitimately say that the Jaguars mortgaged their future to go after him. This is not somebody you just expect to be solid. If they would have just taken somebody at number 5, you can expect them to be good, right? Like the Browns with Mason Graham. If Mason Graham has a good career, we're happy with that pick at 5, right? Or a solid Pro Bowl career, we're happy with that pick. You know, we're not expecting Mason Graham to transform the entire organization. That's not what the intention was with that selection. But when you trade as much as you traded to get Travis Hunter, you are expecting a transformational result, which means that, like, him being good is not just going to be good enough. And the reason I feel like Jacksonville hasn't had a plan for Travis is, if you look at how they've used him, if you look at what they've been trying to do, it feels clueless from day one. They bring him in and they first say that we're going to let him play both sides, right? We're going to go 50-50 on both sides. That was the thing. They were like, we don't do this for somebody we think is going to be a one-way player. Remember, the argument for Travis Hunter in the draft was that he didn't even make sense for the number 2 overall selection, let alone trading all those picks for the number 2 overall selection, if you weren't going to play him significantly on both sides of the ball. Because the argument for Travis Hunter as a number 2 overall pick wasn't that he's that good of a corner or that good of a wide receiver, is that he could be an impact player on third down on both sides of the ball, wide receiver and corner. So that seemed like, if you're going to trade for Travis Hunter, you're going to trade up for him. That seems like it has to be the plan, right? And that's initially what the Jacksonville Jaguars started out with. That's what they said they were going to do in camp. That's what they said they were going to do during the season. And then they get to a point and they're like, actually, we're going to play him more at wide receiver. We're just going to focus on him at wide receiver. And then he gets injured, which, not going to call his career over because he got injured, obviously. But this offseason, they make it clear and they put out there that Travis is going to focus on being a corner. And that one made me go, huh? Right? I try to look at everything that happens with other teams through the lens of how would I react to it if this were happening to Cleveland, and why I would react the way I would react if this were happening to Cleveland, right? Because some things you react because it's Cleveland for specific reasons due to precedent, right? So I don't want to say to everybody I have to react the same to, but, I try to look at news and things I hear about players and put my lens of like, hey, how would I feel if this were the team that I cover that did this or that was doing this? And I'll be honest, if the Browns had drafted Travis Hunter number 2 overall and they were this wishy-washy on what the plan was for him, I'd be massively concerned. Because the one thing you needed to do with Travis Hunter was have a plan. Right? And it doesn't help things that now like Deion talking about how he don't really like what they've been doing with him in Jacksonville, right? Like, that they really commit to the idea of Travis Hunter. And it's kind of crazy because Deion does have a point. You traded a first-round pick, a second-round pick, and your original pick to get this dude. And then you bring him onto your campus, onto your facilities, and it's obvious you didn't have a plan. You just thought you was going to throw Travis Hunter out there like a Pokemon, and he was just going to do shit. Like, that's what it comes off with the Jaguars. And look, the Jaguars are going to fly under the radar for what they did or did not do with Travis Hunter this year. And if they have a good year this year and Travis has a great year this year, nobody's going to ultimately care. But because they were successful last year, nobody really talked about it, right? That's the beauty of winning. You win 12 games, you can get away with murder. Okay? You win 11 games, you can get away with anything. That's what winning does. That is the beauty of winning. That is the joy of winning, right? Remember 2023, all the things that were going wrong with the Browns' offensive line didn't matter. We were winning games. Ended up mattering a couple years later, but didn't matter at the time because we was winning games. You brought that stuff up while they winning games. Don't nobody want to hear that. And that's kind of where they are with Travis. You bring up this stuff, don't nobody want to hear it. They just won 12 games. They just had a season, an incredible season. Not an incredible postseason, but an incredible season. And now they're getting Travis back. I know the zone of optimism that they're in. I'm just saying to myself, if I were following this from a Browns perspective, and this were what the Browns were doing with Travis Hunter after they drafted him, I'd be very concerned. Because what is the plan? How are you going from he's going to be 50-50 on both sides, and the trade doesn't make sense if we don't play him 50-50 on both sides, to, okay, he's going to play primarily wide receiver, to, okay, now he's going to play primarily defensive back? How is Travis Hunter supposed to develop in that way, too? I remember, and this is when I realized that Jason Tarver was one of the best coaches in football, position-wise. When JOK got here, it was real easy for a lot of people to get carried away with the versatility of Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, right? That everybody wanted him to do all these different things. But Jason Tarver was very disciplined with his development of JOK and very intentional with his development of JOK. Sometimes it frustrated people, because we would see these flashes from JOK, but they would stick to the plan. But that's what it was. It was a plan. And that plan developed JOK to being one of the best linebackers in football before his untimely injury. The Browns took it slow with JOK. They said, hey, we're going to give you peace, right? So the first thing they taught JOK was, we're just going to teach you how to play will, right? Just worry about playing will linebacker. Don't worry about trying to be a slot corner on top of it. Don't try to worry about being on some kind of hybrid safety. We're just going to teach you how to play will linebacker first. And then when JOK got really good at that, they moved him over to Mike, and they let him play some Mike linebacker. They taught him Mike. And then they let him cover more. And then they started to expand what he did. But it was a plan over 3 years. They just developed him and gave him a chunk here and gave him a chunk here. The development plan was clear and obvious. The progressions in the development plan was clear and obvious. The work that he was expected to do to get better was clear and obvious. And that's what makes him such a good coach. You saw the same thing with Devin Bush. He brings in Devin Bush. He breaks it down. He's like, no. We're not going to have you out here worried about doing 12 different things. We're going to have you play some special teams, and then we're going to have you play a little bit of Sam linebacker, right, his first year. And then he moves him over to Will linebacker his second year here. And then he lets him run a little free, right, during his latest year in Cleveland. And boom, Devin Bush blossoms into this player who's probably going to get double-digit money in free agency. That's what development looks like, right? Like, that is the kind of stuff that I hope to see on the offensive side of the ball with Todd Monken, is that we get development plans on offense. And I think that's what's been lacking on offense, right? You're getting these guys in, and it's like either they could do it all or they can do nothing. You know, that was the Kevin Stefanski philosophy of developing players. I hope Todd takes a more seasoned approach to developing these players. But let's bring this back to Travis Hunter and look at this from a development perspective. So you bring him in and you say he's going to do both sides of the ball. First off, that's the biggest problem. The scope is too large. But you can't really have the scope be any smaller, because look at what you put, the position you put yourself in. You traded 2 first-round picks and a second-round pick for Travis Hunter, which means he has to be extraordinarily useful to you. And he's not extraordinarily useful at one position, right? He's your wide receiver too. He's your corner too. That individually does not justify the price that you pay. So in order to justify the price that you pay, you have to have him have this gigantic scope. But that's not what's best for his development, is it? So that's the first juxtaposition that Jacksonville created. Got to get your money's worth. There's only one way to get your money's worth, but the way to get your money's worth is not going to make you feel great about this trade early on. So what do? They chose to just throw the scope out. Let's do everything. Okay. They realized there are some issues with that. So they say, okay, we're going to slow this down and we're going to develop you at wide receiver. And that makes sense. I like his skill set at wide receiver. I think he's raw at wide receiver. I think he could be better at wide receiver than he is at corner. But okay, they play him at wide receiver. And then 3 months later, the plan changes again to corner. I mean, it's like, well, what did he just spend the last 6 months trying to get better at, right? Is that just wasted time? What is the plan? Again, Jacksonville got away with it because they won games. The same way that the San Francisco 49ers got away with Trey Lance in that trade, because they won games. So it didn't matter that Trey Lance was terrible. It didn't matter that that trade was terrible, right? Maybe Jacksonville wins games out of this whole conversation, but it is something to think about. The Browns made a massive draft day trade, and it looks like they're going to be the ones to come out on top. And we can use examples on the Browns roster to demonstrate why it is that Jacksonville probably is not developing him properly. It is interesting to watch. It is an interesting conversation we're going to continue to have. And it's something that we should continue to talk about because this, to me, is fascinating. Again, Travis Hunter was not just the second pick of this draft. They traded a lot to get him. And now they're like, okay, well, maybe he could be our second corner. And it's nothing to do with Travis's talent level. It's everything to do with the lack of plan from the Jacksonville Jaguars. And when you think about it, how can there not be a plan? That's what I wanted to talk about. Feels like it's been a while since we talked about that. And, around free agency, everybody starts to talk about the same thing. Maybe this would be a fresh thing to talk about in the sub box. Hope you guys appreciate it. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.